Hi, it's Robin. I've got here a number of music albums, both vinyl records, compact discs, that are inspired by or somehow connected to Commodore. It might be the name of the album or a track. It might be the artwork. One was even published by Commodore, and another has a short Commodore program encoded on the record. I didn't think that a single album here really has enough to it to warrant a full episode, but I thought I would combine them together into one video, as they're still interesting to me, and I've collected several over the years. And just a quick recap on some others that I've already covered. Here's Prodigal's Electric Eye from 1984, which has a Commodore 64 program hidden in a locked groove on the vinyl record. That was remastered just a couple years ago onto red vinyl, and I actually get a mention on the back cover here. And what's really cool is that me and my friend Sam actually got to write a new Commodore 64 program that's on the opposite side of the original on this remastered album. And I also covered this Heartware album, which has a simple C64 game, actually even mentioned here, additional C64 software TV game. And VANLUKAS' recent album, We Are Stardust, contains a really amazing C64 game, again encoded on the vinyl. So check the video description for links to videos that I've already made about those albums. So for the albums we're looking at today, I'm only going to be playing very brief snippets of the music for some context, but as you probably know, YouTube has very aggressive content matching, so I may have to skip over or even mute the music in those spots in the future. If you want to listen to any of this music, I recommend you find it full here on YouTube or elsewhere. But the main point here isn't to listen to the music, it's to explore how the music was somehow connected with Commodore computers. And there's quite a bit of variety here. As always, I'll have chapter indexes so you can jump around if you want. Okay, so first album we'll look at here is by the band CATfISH, and the album name is Transactor. And that should sound familiar to viewers of my channel. For starters, it's the name of my favorite Commodore magazine, The Transactor, made here in Canada. But do you know where that name came from? Well, when they first released the Commodore PET computer, instead of just letting it be PET, it had to be like an acronym standing for Personal Electronic Transactor. I don't know if they did that just because they thought it was cute, or they were a bit worried about being sued by the pet rock people if they just called it a PET. I don't know. So apparently the members of CATfISH were fans of the Commodore PET. And if you think, well, it's just a coincidence, Transactor, Commodore didn't invent that word. Well, here you see the track listing, and the very last track on side 2 is called Peek and Poke, which I think puts to rest any other meaning. Very common, basic commands in the Commodore line of computers, for better or worse. So there's no big Easter egg hidden on here or anything. This is just the first example I know of somewhat mainstream music. Well, I don't know if you can call this mainstream, but I was pretty excited when I discovered this album, I think way back in the 90s. This album from 1981 may be the first example of a band being inspired by Commodore computers. Interestingly, on the label, instead of being called CATfISH, they're CATfISH. I don't know if that's just kind of like a German translation thing or whatever, I don't know. It says it on both side A and side B. And it's probably no surprise that this is heavily electronic music, kind of a minimalist synth pop. I heard one description call it krautrock. Some of it's a bit harsh, but I'll play a sample. There's a few tracks that I think are fantastic. I think my favorite is the last track on side A called Dreamlines. Okay, I've got Transactor here on my turntable. As I've explained before, I often use one of my really cheap turntables because I find it works better when dealing with data. Now, there's no data on this record, but we will be looking at one shortly that does have it. And also, this turntable has built-in monitors, which I find quite handy while I'm doing recording with this. The first track is called Columbia, and I'll just give you a quick example of how some of the music on this is a bit jarring. Sounds like those squeaky balloon synth there. But the final track on side 1 called Dreamlines, I think is brilliant. And see if it reminds you of anything. Actually reminds me a lot of the in-game music from Delta, which is a very long piece, but my favorite part is later on in the song, and it has a very similar vibe to this Transactor track. So I don't know if Rob Hubbard had CATfISH as an inspiration or not. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have this picture disc with a large Commodore symbol on it. As far as I know, this is the original plastic sleeve it came in. No other packaging, but the picture disc kind of does the talking. So let's take it out here. There's side A. And there's side B. Both photos of canoe or kayak sporting events. So look up close here. The Race, original music for the World Championships rowing, canoe, and kayak. All music composed, arranged, produced, and performed by VANLUKAS. So as we read here, Commodore is the sole sponsor of the World Championships rowing 1985. So those World Championships were held in Belgium in 1985, and for whatever reason, Commodore Belgium decided to sponsor the event, and for, I don't know why, release this album of music that is somehow inspired by the Rowing World Championships. See, the tracks have names like The Race, Too Late, The Triumph, Waltz for the Winner, Losing. And side B, Too Soon, Clash of the Titans, Steps, The Party, 21, and Calliope, published by Commodore Computers, Envy, Belgium. And I noticed a strange comment here on side A, at the bottom here, no Fairlight CMI, that's a computer musical instrument, used on this album. I thought that was a really strange thing to say. Why no Fairlight? There's plenty of synths, and they certainly aren't all Commodore-made synthesizers. Well, I looked into it a bit more, and there's a strange connection with Phil Collins' famous No Jacket Required album, also from 1985. Sorry, I only have this on cassette, not on vinyl or CD. And there's Phil. And down here, it's really hard to make out, even zoomed in here, but it says, there is no Fairlight on this record. Right down here at the bottom. Tiny print. So, one tremendously famous album from 1985, one super obscure album, but both wanted to make it clear that they weren't using the Fairlight synthesizer computer music instrument on the albums, even though both are kind of synth heavy. What would be the motivation for that? I don't know, just to prove that they're using their own unique instruments, that they're not following the crowd. I don't know. I don't think it was a backlash against electronic instruments in general, because as I said, both of them do feature that. And as for the actual music on here, well, I prefer CATfISH quite a bit. And just give a quick listen to The Race by VANLUKAS. I don't know if this will have a content match or not. No Fairlight CMI. And next up we have another German album, Flucht nach Vorn, Cubano. Apologies for my German. This album from 1984 does have, I don't know if you could call it an Easter egg, because it does say right on the back here, C64 Shift Run Stop. So this one actually does have a Commodore program encoded on it. Just look at the record a little bit more and then I'll break out the Commodore 64. On side A, it has no real detail on the label at all. And on side B, it says side A has Cubano and B has this boycott mix on it, but it doesn't actually mention the Commodore program at all on this record, but it is on the back cover. The actual Commodore data isn't in a locked groove on this one. It's this extra, just right there, that there's that thin black line, and then that's the C64 data right up next to it. There's just one song on the whole side, and when it finishes, then the C64 data plays almost right after. And note that this is at 45 RPM, or UPM in German, I guess. Unlike most 12-inch records that are 33 RPM. 12-inch single, I guess they call these. Okay, we'll hook up the C64 and give this a try. Flucht nach Vorn. I don't know how to say that. And we have to switch it to 45 RPM, because that's what this was recorded at. Now, just to show how here at the end of the song,
Come back.
so that's the end of the track, and then we'll hear the data. It'll be quite a piercing sound. And then after this carrier is the actual data. Okay, so that's not going to do anything on its own. I'm going to hook up the Commodore 64 and we'll play this data into it. Okay, so I'll be using this device called the MP3 to C64. It plugs into the back of the Commodore 64 into the cassette port, and it essentially replicates the functionality, the little amount of circuitry that is in a Commodore dataset, cassette recorder, is duplicated here. And it allows you to have a 3.5 millimeter input and even a pass-through output. And it actually has quite a few functions, like you can actually use it to duplicate tapes at the digital level. I'll just be running the output from my record player into the input here and plugging this into the Commodore 64, and it should allow us to load the file, if it works. Okay, so it just plugs in back there. So I just had a cable there. Not there. So from the turntable, I now have a 3.5 millimeter cable, which I'm plugging into that MP3 to C64. And we'll power up. Okay, we'll type load. I won't press return yet. So raise the arm here and go back to the end of that song I just played. And after that voice, just otherwise this music might get confused for data and we'll get a load error. Okay, now press return. There's the carrier. Let's see if it picks it up. Okay, now I'm going to lift the stylus off just to look at the screen here. You see how it says found Flucht 2. Oh, it just cleared. Essentially what's being done is that Commodore 64 program is being written, saved onto cassette, which converts it into an audio file, which is then put on the vinyl record. It's actually an audio cassette file in the special Commodore protocol, put on a vinyl record. Now, a big difference between a cassette drive and a vinyl record is that the Commodore cassette drive, the motor can be controlled by the Commodore 64. So what happens is when you try to load a program from cassette and the C64 finds a program name, it displays the file name on screen and gives you the option to either load by pressing the Commodore key or just waiting a while, or you can press, I believe, spacebar, you can skip the file. But the important thing is that the Commodore 64 turns off the cassette motor at that moment so that the cassette doesn't continue to run. Now, when you're doing this off of a turntable, the C64 can't control the spinning of that record. And so this file name is displayed, but the record continues to play into the data file and you miss it. And the Commodore 64 never gets to hear that because it thinks that the cassette is paused and waiting. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to show you that the file name is indeed here, but we've missed the data. So the solution to this is just to hold down the Commodore key and you won't even see that that file has been found. Okay, so we're going to do this again. I'm going to clear the screen. I'll type in load again. Okay, so I place the needle near the end again. You might hear a little bit of the sound from my monitors. It doesn't sound that tinny if you play it through good speakers. Okay, here we go. Load. Okay, and what I'm going to do is hold the Commodore key so it immediately loads as soon as it finds the file. There, the screen blinked, and now it's actually loading the file. Now, if this goes properly, it's not a very long file. Oh, load error. That's too bad. Huh, it actually looks like it's okay. Just to be sure, I'm going to reset the computer. Hold down Commodore. So that loads right away. Okay, found the file. Hey, no error that time. And we'll list it. There's the program. And let's run it. And there it is. So, some of the Easter eggs I've shown before have been underwhelming, so to speak. But I think this one wins as far as underwhelming Easter eggs go. It's the journey, not the destination. And I still think it's pretty cool that some random German album from 1984 had a Commodore 64 program on it. Okay, press stop and look at it. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, I ran it through Google Translate, and it says something like the definitive Telespeil. That's not very helpful. I could have done that myself. So the band name means something like flee to the front. The third line translates as you will find at the end of the next, and then it says LP from cursing forward. But I asked my friend Mager Valp, and he came up with a better translation, the definitive TV game. You'll find it at the end of the next LP by Flucht, Nach, Vorn. Why do I keep saying that? I keep saying it wrong. He asked some even more German-speaking friends who translated the first line as the ultimate video game. Telespeil was a term from the late 70s and early 1980s, kind of the Atari VCS era, and they were called TV games, kind of literally. But nowadays it's Videospiel, which is video games. So in the early 80s, the German word for video games was more often TV games, Telespeil. And we had a similar thing here in North America for a little while before video games became the popular term. There was a time where TV games was used. And I don't think that TV games means games on television, like broadcast television. It does seem to be video games from a console. Okay, so basically the Easter egg on this album, or whatever you're going to call it, the program on this album is saying that the band's next album, their full long play, will have the ultimate video game on it. So, like a sucker, I went and bought a copy, and here it is from 1985, Talking is Over. And here on the back cover, see the track names, including the second last one called The Game. Pretty hard to make that out, eh? But the fact is, there is no game on this album. There's no data on this album at all. Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard for me to prove this, prove a negative to you. But I challenge anyone. I guess you're just going to have to go buy your own copy of this album if you don't believe me. But I looked everywhere. There is no data track. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 audio tracks here on side 2, which matches the track listing here. And there is no special locked groove. There's just a regular run-out groove. No place for data there. I need to dust this again. And there are 4 music tracks here. And again, this is side 1. And there's just no, normally you would see a tight grouping of tracks here if there were data, but there is not. So that was one of my worst purchases ever. I don't even like the music. There's no data. There's no reference to, sorry, we couldn't deliver the best game ever. Not that I really expect it to be the best game ever, but some sort of Easter egg, some sort of data on here. Nothing. So either they're liars or they're incompetent or it's a prank. I don't know. Anyway, so long to vinyl and the 80s. We're moving into the 90s, into the CD era for the last couple examples. And here we've got Bochum Welt, who's actually an Italian producer, but he seems to have kind of a German name. And do you recognize that design? The stripes here, the screenshot, and some low-res graphics there for a game screenshot. When I first saw this, I immediately thought VIC-20. This is borrowing heavily from the official Commodore released VIC-20 software on cassette. I found some examples here. Stop Thief, Type a Tune, Spectre. And they all have very similar layouts to this, from the same white stripes at the side, the slightly rounded TV set screenshot. Although all those examples I found were either red or blue. I didn't actually see any green colored ones, but I don't know if those exist or that was just Bochum Welt taking liberties there. Thanks to R. Grosha of the Denial Vic20 Wiki for the pictures of those other Commodore cassettes. So it was only once I bought this that I discovered that the rest of the artwork does not have any Vic20 theme to it. And this is actually a compilation album, the original Vic20 themed album, Module 2, plus this other album, Desktop Robotics. It's like a re-release or a compilation album, I believe released in Japan. And unfortunately, it doesn't have any of the other Vic20 theming that the original release of Module 2 had. So I was pretty disappointed about that, but I also wasn't going to spend even more money. So instead, I found the artwork online. Sorry, some of it's very low resolution. On the original vinyl release of this album, one side of the album has basically a VIC-20 diagram showing all the things you can plug in to a VIC-20, to the user port like a modem, the cassette port, serial bus for a disk drive or printer, video output, expansion port with memory expanders, plug-in programs, and the game port. So that's pretty cool. And on the flip side of the record, it looks like the 6-pin DIN IEC port where you would normally plug your disk drive cable. And in the liner notes, it shows this 7x5 grid of PET characters, some loading instructions, and, really cool, the VIC-20 guy makes an appearance. And most interesting is here on the back cover, there's some VIC-20 basic code. And what's extra cool is that the CD and vinyl versions actually have different program listings that match the media. This music CD is just single-sided, and of course the vinyl record is double-sided. So each program is essentially a track listing, but the program varies to match the either single or double-sided nature of the media. So I'm going to hook up the VIC-20, and I'm going to show you both these programs. I typed them in. Okay, so I pull up my VIC-20, and I typed in that program listing, first the CD version. So if I list that, well, it's actually more than a page worth. But the way you know it's definitely a VIC-20 listing, for example, this poke is to change the border and background color. And I don't know of any other computer that would have that particular poke, 36879, and actually have it do something in context. And so essentially what the program does, defines this function that is completely meaningless. It's just, I guess, to say that Module 2, it's taking some liberties here. Clears the screen, sets the border colors, dimensions a string array with 8 elements, and there are 8 tracks, although Commodore Basic is 0 base, so this is actually 9 elements, one more than is needed, but that's okay. Then it just prints some prompts, and it does a for next loop from 1 to 8, and it reads the track name in from data statements that we'll see in a moment, and then just prints it out, and it just does that in a loop. And it has this input loop where it's just waiting for you to press return. It's just an easy way for the program to pause until the user interacts. So it just loops through and prints each of the tracks. Then it clears the screen. And the final bit of the program is just a for next loop. And then there's these data statements that are the track names. Okay, let's try running it. On question mark prompt, press return. Okay, kind of bad formatting. Track 1 is entitled, well, you notice here it goes entitled, and there's no space before the track name, plus it doesn't wrap very nice. Anyway, press return. Track 2 is entitled Radio Propulsive PAPH or something. So basically each of the 8 tracks, it gives you their name, and then the screen clears and it prints Bochum Welt 1,000 times. So we're not going to wait for all 1,000 there. How many did we get up to? X. We got up to 303. Okay, so what I actually did was I fixed up the program. The first time I typed it in very literally from the listing. Oh, that looks bad. So I didn't delete useless code like this, but what I did do was I cleaned up here this print statement on line 50, so the formatting would be nicer. I also changed the color of some of the printing to make it a little bit more clear. Anyway, we'll run it and you can see how it looks. Track 1 is entitled Avtomatis or something. Radio propulsive, and so on. So you can see the formatting is just nicer now. Okay, and like I was mentioning, let's quickly look at this. There's also the album or the vinyl version of the program, which I think is really cool. It has a different listing. So it's mostly the same, but there's a nested loop instead. Or first we should look, line 5 here dimensions album as 2,4. So instead of a one-dimensional array for the 8 CD track names, he's defined a two-dimensional 2x4 array to reflect that each side of the vinyl album has 4 songs on it. So it's just a nice touch. And then lines 30 and 40 further go with this, where instead of just going through the 8 tracks, it's a nested loop from side equals 1 to 2, and then track equals 1 to 4 on each side. So this is, I guess this isn't mind-blowing, but to me this is really cool that this little Easter egg program would be accurate, more or less, to the particular media release it's on, reflecting that the vinyl record is a double-sided thing. Of course, I guess CDs could be, but most music CDs, of course, only have music on one side of them. So we'll run the program. Side 1, track 1 is entitled, you see again, it has that same formatting error, but goes through track 1, track 2, and I don't really like how after side 1 there's a space, then the comma, then no space. But again, it just goes through, and now we're on side 2, track 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the same ending. So just to show you, I just went through the program again and cleaned it up a little bit. Side 1, comma, space, I think that looks nicer, is entitled. And then there's the track name, side 1, track 2, 3, 4, side 2, track 1, and so on. Do you know of any other music releases that have a type-in program on them? Even if it's not, all that impressive in the end, it's still a pretty cool thing. And you know me, I like my type-ins. Let me know and I'll type it in. And as for the actual music, it's an electronic style, electro. Some categorize it as IDM, so-called intelligent dance music. So let's just give it a quick listen. Got my Commodore CD TV hooked up. So what else am I going to play CDs on, right? Guess I could play it on my 300 CD changer. All right. Put it in the caddy, which is required. And in it goes. And just a quick sample of Bochum Welt on this spiffy CD player. Play. Next track. That's intelligent dance music. Final Commodore-inspired album we'll look at is by this band Barcelona, and this album is called Simon Basic all in caps, and if that sounds familiar, that's because there's a Commodore 64 cartridge called Simon's Basic, slight difference there, Simon's singular or Simon's possessive, and this Simon's Basic was programmed by, I believe, David Simons, a 16-year-old at the time in England, who basically made his own enhanced BASIC, and Commodore ended up publishing it. I should make a full video about that sometime. And again, in case you think that's just a coincidence, the Simon Basic, if we look here at the track listing, and the fourth track is called C64. Which I think is a very fun song, and of course it's about the Commodore 64. And we'll give Simon Basic a listen here. Put up in the caddy. Go to track 4, which is the one called C64, and play.
I've got 64K memory. I've got cartridge ports on every knee. I've got power cords strung at the door. Think I'll set up my bulletin board.
Okay, content match. Instead, I'll do a dramatic reading of the lyrics of C64. So I actually talked to the songwriter Jason Corzin just this week on Twitter, and he helped clarify the lyrics. So here we go. Here's the probably right lyrics according to the songwriter himself. I've got 64K memory. I've got cartridge ports I'll never need. I've got power cords strung out the door. Think I'll set up my bulletin board. Got a modem when I turned 13, but my dad doesn't know what telephony means. Only 1200 baud, never leave my room. My skin's turning pale. Knocks on the door. Please don't disturb me, I'm here with my C64. Learn to freak through the phone company. I've got friends somewhere in Germany. Cracked a file to join MOD. Make free long-distance calls overseas. One Saturday morning, the feds at the door, seize all my notebooks and take away my Commodore. So that kind of escalated. So as with many songs, it's not completely autobiographical. So the songwriter wasn't actually a member of MOD, Masters of Deception, as mentioned here in the hacker crackdown. Or was he? So the music is kind of that indie pop that maybe some of you hate, but I like it. And I encourage you to seek out the full song yourself. And even once Barcelona was done as a band, Jason's next band was called Sprites. Here's their album Modern Gameplay. And I confirmed with Jason that yes, Sprites is a reference to the movable object blocks of the Commodore 64. Alright, so I hope you found at least some of that interesting. I love the interconnectedness of things. Besides retro computers and video games, music really is my next favorite thing. And I love when these worlds combine, sometimes very directly and sometimes in a more kind of roundabout inspirational way. Thanks to my patrons for their support. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.